and welcome to another Trial Site News interview. I'm Brandon, your host, and today we'll be talking to Thomas Haviland. Tom recently completed what he's calling a worldwide embalmer blood clot survey. It was conducted from December 8th, 2023 to January 8th of this year. Mr. Haviland, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Brandon, for having me on the show to talk about this very important topic.
Before we start, can you give us a summary of your background?
Sure. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force major, spent 20 years in the Air Force, and spent 16 years after that as a defense contractor. I'm an electrical engineer. I have a mathematics degree from the Ohio State University, a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Louisiana Tech University, and a master's in computer resources and information management from Webster University in St. Louis.
So that brings up the question, how did you get active in this research?
Well, I watched that film Died Suddenly that came out the week of Thanksgiving of 2022. And it was a film that had about 6 or 7 embalmers that said they were seeing these strange white fibrous clots in their corpses. So I, on a whim, the next day after I watched that movie, I called the Ohio Embalmers Association in Cincinnati, Ohio, about an hour south of me. I live in Dayton, Ohio. And I talked to their president, vice president, and secretary, and one of those gentlemen actually said that he's an embalmer himself. He runs his own funeral home in a small town north of me and does his own embalming. And he said he was seeing these strange white fibrous clots too. So I had official confirmation from an official officer of the Ohio Embalmers Association that he was seeing the clots. So right then and there, I decided to do a survey, a nationwide survey, that I later on, Brandon, turned into a worldwide survey to see just how prevalent this phenomenon was.
Can you give our audience some raw numbers regarding your survey? How many embalmers did you solicit and how many replies did you receive?
Yeah, I sent the survey out to 50 national, state, and regional funeral director associations all over the world, each of those with hundreds of member funeral directors and embalmers underneath those organizations. I also used a bottom-up approach. I actually found out the email addresses for over 1,700 funeral homes around the world, and I sent this survey to them directly. It was in an email with a link to a SurveyMonkey survey. It's a common online tool used to conduct surveys.
Sure.
So very quick, easy. It was about a 4-minute survey, about 12 questions, very simple to take.
Okay. How many replies did you receive total in the survey?
I received 269 replies to the survey, which is, I think, is significant enough to say that Houston, we may have a problem here. Because when you hear the results, you'll see that we've got some disturbing results, Brandon.
So let's dive into the survey results. What were the observations from the embalmers?
Well, this is the second survey that we did this year. We did one last year as well. And last year, when we asked the embalmers about these strange white fibrous clots that were appearing in their corpses, about seven out of every 10 embalmers said they were seeing them at the end of 2022. And they were seeing them in about 30% of their corpses. So we asked the same question again this year. We asked the embalmers at the end of 2023, are you still seeing the white fibrous clots? And the answer came in, yeah, 197 out of the 269, which is 73% of the embalmers responding to the survey said they are indeed still seeing the white fibrous clots at the end of 2023. And they saw them at an average of about 20% of their corpses this year. So it's a little bit down from last year, which is it's a good thing, but they're still seeing them.
Sure. In reviewing your survey results, I think it was interesting to point out there was an increase in infant deaths.
Yes, there was. Now, in the survey, a lot of the embalmers may not see infant deaths these days because I understand that hospitals, I think, are offering to dispose of the remains more for the parents when they have a loss at the hospital. Also, I think a lot of infants are also being cremated this year, but we still did get a response from the embalmers. About 20% of the embalmers said they saw an increase in fetal deaths in 2023, SIDS, miscarriages, those kind of things, fetal demises, over the years prior to COVID and the COVID vaccines. So it's a disturbing trend that infant deaths seem to be up about 20%, and about, like I said, 20% of the embalmers saw that.
So we do want to emphasize we cannot be certain what's causing the observations. What are your next steps? For example, are you attempting to initiate a controlled study that could be peer reviewed, potentially published?
Yeah, before we go there, by the way, I want to mention that one of the other questions we asked this year, Brandon, was about microclotting. The
Okay.
embalmers are seeing a lot of that as well. In fact, 80%, 79% of the embalmers responding to the survey are seeing this new phenomenon called microclotting. Uh, they've seen very rarely in the past, in the years prior to COVID and the COVID vaccines. And they were seeing that in about 25% of their corpses, which is very disturbing. It's evidence to the embalmers. They describe it almost as coffee grounds or dirty blood that's coming off the drainage of the corpse as they're trying to get the formaldehyde in and take the blood out. They're seeing what, like I said, looks like coffee grounds. And these can be just as dangerous as these white fibrous clots because they can block off your oxygen supply at the capillary level, the very small blood vessels, that exchange oxygen at the lungs and then carry it to the rest of the body. So that was a phenomenon that was very disturbing as well.
Sure.
What I did when I had the results, Brandon, is I actually 2 days ago I sent them in immediately to the FDA, CDC, and NIH, and advised them that they need to take a look at this data, and then do a survey themselves. Right? And I'm a private citizen. I just did this. I'm retired and have the time to do it, but it's something that I think they should very, very closely look at because there's only a couple things that have changed over the last few years, and that would be the COVID virus itself and the COVID vaccine. So they might be two of the things that the FDA and CDC want to take a look at to see why there's this tremendous increase in all these various clotting issues.
Have you heard back from anyone in that email?
Nothing yet. No, it's only been in their hands for a couple of days. Now, last year when we had our first survey done, and I sent the results immediately in January of 2023 to the FDA with the results of our first survey, and heard nothing back from them the entire year. So it's quite unfortunate, but
Sure.
yeah.
Did you receive pictures from any embalmers that replied back to you? Have you heard back from anyone directly?
Yeah, I have. I've seen received pictures from embalmers that we've actually used in the survey. One of the very first thing the embalmers all saw when they went into our survey was a photograph of some white fibrous clots to make sure they understood what they were looking at and say, hey, yeah, I'm seeing the same kind of thing. And we actually had a comments box at the very end of both of these surveys that we did last year's and this year's. And many of the embalmers responded in the comments box that, yeah, I've seen fibrous clots just like that, 4 to 10 inches long, tough, rubbery, hard to break, nothing like the what they call chicken fat clots that the embalmers have been seeing for decades, or grape jelly clots that they've also been seeing forever as well. These white fibrous clots are long, large, tough, and new. The embalmers, many of them with 20 or 30 years of experience, have never seen them before. In fact, one of the officers of the Ohio Embalmers Association himself, the president, actually sent me the photograph of some white fibrous clots that he had pulled out of one of his corpses. So this phenomenon is happening and it's prevalent. By the way, um, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That brings up the point or the question I was thinking in regards to the 269 when you're who you received replies from. Approximately how many were in the U.S.? How many were in Europe, or what was the breakdown if you have just a rough estimate?
It was a lopsided breakdown, Brandon. Unfortunately, the USA embalmers responded quite well. I had 231 responses from USA embalmers, but even that was lopsided. I got the majority of the responses came in from one state, Pennsylvania, which is somewhat telling to me because I followed up after I sent the survey out. I followed up with phone calls to the state of presidents, and Pennsylvania responded beautifully. I talked to their executive director, Miss Kathy Ryan, who runs the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association. Her assistant, Allison Hinkle. They immediately sent out my survey to embalmers in Pennsylvania, who supplied about 128 responses to my survey in just 2 days.
Okay.
But the other states didn't respond as well, which is somewhat telling. I'm not sure why they didn't want to let their embalmers participate in the survey. Canada responded fairly well. I had about 30 responses from Canadian embalmers, but very little responses, Brandon, from the countries from UK or from Australia and New Zealand.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why. I think there's a certain fear with answering the survey. Even though we turned off the IP tracking feature in SurveyMonkey, a lot of the embalmers, I think, were pressured into not taking the survey because I think they suspected that there could be a potential link to the COVID-19 vaccines and the formation of this unusual clotting. We don't know. That's pure speculation, but I think that may have been one of the reasons why we didn't receive responses from some areas of the world.
Yeah. So it sounds like Pennsylvania was the only one where the president had sent that out as well. So maybe from that coming from the president of Pennsylvania Association, that's what gave you that added weight to get people to reply.
Right. And I confirmed by making contact with them after I saw that tremendous response in a couple of days. I called them and said, yeah. And they said, yeah, we just, we sent it out to our email list of all of our members of our funeral homes and embalmers, and they responded beautifully. And their response was mixed. About 70% of the embalmers said they were seeing the white fibrous clots and the microclotting, and about 20 to 30% said they were not.
Yeah, so that aligns with the rest of your results.
Yeah, right in line with the rest of the results.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything here that I've not asked so far that you wanted to comment about the survey? Anything we have not covered?
One of the other things that was interesting that we didn't get a chance to ask last year, but we asked this year, was on age stratification. We wanted to know were the embalmers seeing the clots in any particular age group over others.
Yeah.
And every age group, unfortunately, had seen it. The embalmer said there was an increase in the clotting. We went from like 0 to 5 years, 5 to 20, 20 to 35, 35 to 50, 50 to 65, 65 to 80, 80 and older. The longest bars, the ones with the most responses, were for ages 36 years old and up. And I wasn't surprised to see the longest bars, the most responses were for the elderly, those in the 65 to 80-year-old range, for example. But I was a little bit distressed in seeing a fairly long bar, a lot of responses in the 36-year-old to 50-year-old age group, because you don't think of those people, really, having trouble with plaque, cholesterol, starting the clogging of their pipes, so to speak, but unfortunately, the embalmers are seeing a lot of this unusual clotting in that age group as well. So that's something to be very concerned about.
Sure. Well, Thomas Haviland, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss this.
Thank you, Brandon, for having me on the show. And I'll make one more pitch to the FDA and the CDC. Please go out and investigate this, because these clots exist and they're prevalent.
And for unbiased news and opinion articles and the latest in scientific research, please visit trialsitenews.com.